if you guys have looked on Edmodo, it says that you guys have a quiz tomorrow in the Count of Monte Cristo. Just so you know, that's not going to be like a quiz you've taken up to now at this point. It's actually going to be a group quiz. So basically, I'm going to be asking you guys questions as a group. So if any one of you guys gets the answer right, then you all get it right. So it's really nothing you need to study for. It's not going to be really that hard. It's more of a, did you guys get the gist of the movie? So it really shouldn't be much of an issue. No really more different than what we've talked about already. So there's nothing really you can study or say for it. I wouldn't worry about it. It's mostly just to give you guys credit for watching the movie and for asking the overarching themes and kind of what was talked about. So really. Though today we are going to finish the section you guys read last week, which is chapter 5, section 4, which is on Russia. And I will say I'm actually adding part to the section because it doesn't mention Catherine in this chapter. She's in her own chapter later on when we get to the Enlightenment, and I find that that's a bit of a mistake because while she claimed to be an enlightened despot, a king who used enlightenment, she's really an absolute monarch. So she kind of belongs with Peter more so in her own section, in my opinion. And indeed, in the previous textbook, that's how it was handled. So I'm going to do it that way. So just so you know, there's a slight difference to what you might expect. The other thing is just like with the other previous sections, there's a lot of words. It's an incoming wall of text. So we have to be able to summarize our topic and make it make sense. Trust me, this is a skill you will be using a lot in your life. If nothing else, whenever you guys get around to signing a lease, either for a car, or rather, not so much a lease, I mean to say a loan, you're going to have paperwork out the wazoo. You have to be able to take the important parts out of it so you know what's what, especially if you guys are doing the selling. So, we have a wall of text. Can you guess what this whole section's about? Peter, sure. So we're looking at things that Peter did, things that were important about Peter. The first bullet, what's the point of the first bullet? What's it talking about? What's the main subject? Yeah, when he was very young. So basically the thing to take away from that, when Peter becomes czar, he's young. Okay? That's the first thing you need to know. What's the second bullet about? What does it talk about? He spent his time learning where? The English, the Dutch, the Scottish, perhaps in the German sector. So basically, what's he doing? He's learning about Europeans from Europeans living in Moscow. So essentially, he's learning about the West with a capital W. The West with a capital W refers to European democratic or parliamentary systems, usually referring to European culture, anything that involves that. So, for instance, the United States, even though it's not European, will be considered part of the West. And what he realizes pretty quick, according to Bullet 3, is that Russia is behind Europe. Culturally, technologically, Europe is light years ahead of Russia. Russia's kind of still stuck in the Middle Ages. And so he seeks to fix that. He undertakes a process called westernization. That's a word you will all need to know. Westernization. The definition of which is adopting Western ideas and technologies. So this could be its own sub-bullet, this westernization, because pretty much the next slide and a half is all about policies he enacted to westernize Russia. So first off, what does he do? He adopts an autocratic government. You guys know what autocrat means? What an autocrat is? Let's address some different Latin words, shall we? Democratic is ruled by who? Yeah, ruled by the people, right? Ruled by many. Hence, demo. Auto You guys know what auto is? It means self. Think about this, an automobile. You know, a car is self-moving. Yes? It moves itself. It doesn't have forces drawing it or any other form of propulsion. It's self-moving. Therefore, an autocrat is self-ruling. It's ruled by one person. An autocratic system of government. That's the first thing he does. The reason is, he knows that Russians will not willingly westernize. They will not willingly change their culture. This is not abnormal. It's very hard for people to be forced to change. You know, you can't, it's really hard to make someone do what you want them to do if they're determined not to do it. I know teenagers know nothing about that. So what he does is he is becoming an autocrat. He's becoming what we might call an absolute monarch. So he can force the Russian people to do what he wants. And the first thing he does is force the boyars, who are basically nobles, to serve the government. They can either do it civilly, they can act in various civilian sectors within the government, various positions, judges, that sort of thing, or serving in the military. Now, contrary to popular belief, service in the military for a long time was not seen as a very glamorous lifestyle choice. In fact, the only reason people tend to choose the military is they had no other choice. So, for instance, if you look at your common soldiery, the average foot soldier, they did it because the alternative was probably starvation. Remember, this is a society where the first son inherits everything. So if you were a daughter, well, it didn't matter. You were going to marry somebody and they were going to take care of it. But what about other sons? Where were they going to make their living? Traditionally speaking, they would seek out other alternatives, sailing, trying to find a mentor, being part of a guild, or joining the military. In the case of noble houses, the military was a great option for second sons who could go out and maybe try to earn a piece of land for themselves from service to the king. So there's a whole almost subclass of noble soldiers serving in the military. So this wasn't like something that they really wanted to do, but it was one of the options given to them. And some chose that, others chose more civilian methods. And basically the cushiest jobs went to his supporters. Now, a thing about him personally that you don't really have to write down, but maybe will just kind of help you kind of see who this guy is he was freakishly tall. I believe he was something like 6'2" at the time, which isn't really that tall today, but for the time, the average height was around 5'5", 5'6". So he's a full, almost foot taller than people. This would be like, our president being 7 feet tall. Just towering over people. And the thing is, he was broad-shouldered. He was a big, strong man. He was very well educated. He was very high energy. And he was constantly changing things, just like changing every aspect of their society. People looked at him like he was a complete freak. The way he would go about trying to change things. And they had to more or less go along with it. He was also not exactly the most forgiving person. He's like a lot of people in history, he was mixed. He did some really nice things, he did some great things for Russia, but he was also a little bit ruthless. If you disagree with him, he would have you publicly tortured and killed. For instance, a great example to his character was what happened when he found out his wife had been cheating on him. You see, Peter never had an heir. He was too busy making a new state, not really staying at home and doing what was necessary to have a child. So she found comfort in the arms of another person. He found out about it. And so Peter had his wife's lover executed, the head placed in a jar and preserved in alcohol, and forced her to keep it on her mantelpiece. So, yeah. On the other hand, we'll see he did some pretty sweet things as well. So, like most people, he's got a mixed legacy. One of the biggest problems that comes out of his reign is instead of getting rid of serfdom, the system of feudalism, he actually strengthens it. See, peasants did have some rights in the feudal system. And he starts taking even some of those little rights away. For instance, peasants could move. But under the feudal system, they are tied to the land. They cannot move. Yes? Serfdom is basically another way of saying feudalism. In feudalism, you had, a sort of pyramid hierarchy, with the very bottom being the peasants. This is basically everybody else. They didn't own land. They worked on farms to support the lords above them, right? That's the majority of people, right? So he's taking their rights away. And that is going to, of course, shoot him, and not really him, but it's going to shoot later czars in the foot and result in one of the Blaze revolutions we've ever known. Right. So another thing he does is he makes people dress like Europeans. Now this has pretty bad backlashes, but the thing that really sticks to it is forcing the boyars to shave their beards. Now in Europe, beards were not popular. In Russia, beards were a symbol of masculinity. It was almost one of the oldest forms of telling if you were a man or not. Well, can you grow a beard? If you can't, you're a man now. And so just think about what would happen if we took away something that people identify their gender with. So, in essence, if the government said right now all men must wear dresses at all times, what do you think the backlash to that would be? They'd probably just refuse, yeah? And some guys might be like, sweet! And start wearing it. Most probably like, yeah, I'm not doing that. So how does Peter enforce it? He gets police to run around St. Peter, well, not just St. Peter, but all Russia, and if they find a dude with a beard, they forcibly shave them. So they will hold them down and shave them. Now, how many of you guys have ever had a chance to shave an animal? For instance, my wife had two long-haired cats, and they had to be shaved every now and again to keep the matting down, right? Let me just tell you, if you have a very angry cat and you're trying to hold it down and shave it, you are in for a wild time, buddy. We're talking, we had to wrap this cat in a towel, put on welding gloves, and put all of your weight down on this cat, because the second those clippers started on, it was freaking out. I mean, angry kitty, claws, it's not good. There's blood on the floor, you want to watch out. Sounds like a metal song. Anyway, so you can imagine what reaction this has with people. It's absolute pandemonium. There's a lot of things he changes, but that's too much. So he grudgingly agrees to let the boyars keep their beards if they pay a beard tax. True story. Now, other things he does, he starts throwing European-style shindigs, balls, where everyone comes forward. And this is another major change. He actually makes women more equal in society by bringing them out in the limelight. You see, the thing of it is, women were basically sequestered at home. They weren't allowed out without the male going with them. If you guys are familiar with some of the problems India has had with rape recently, you guys have been following that in the news. It's been a major problem in some areas in India. Basically, a woman walking by herself and she's gang raped, essentially, and all the men blame it on her because why would she be out of the house without a male chaperone? The idea is that she was asking for it by not being protected by a man. Okay, that's the type of cultural mentality that was around, is that women belonged to someone, and unless you protected them, it could be taken away. That's what happens when you don't have law, by the way. So that's anarchy right there. Yeah. Neither. It's simply because they want to do an activity and no one's going to stop them. This is what happens when you take away accountability for actions. In fact, if you look at what happened with the Nazis and the Holocaust, mostly that's what was going on, is their accountability was taken away. If you think about it, human beings can be pretty awful people whenever we're cut loose and do whatever we want. That's one of the reasons why law exists. People, by their own nature, are pretty impulsive things. And society is what kind of tells us, yeah, you can't just kill that person because they upset you. Now granted, not everyone is the same, and of course there are exceptions to that, but as a rule, individuals tend to not act on those impulses. But whenever you have a group of people acting together and not thinking, you can get to some really dangerous things, such as what we're talking about. We'll talk more about all that stuff when we get to A, the Holocaust, and B, start getting into natural rights, which is what we'll be enlightenment here the next couple of weeks. Yeah.
So is rape not illegal in India?
It is. It's punishable by death, actually. Well, that's the thing, is they blame the woman for it. That's why would she be out and about? And the thing is, you might say, well, that's backwards. How can the culture do that? Because ours does it too. If you think about it, if a woman is raped out at night because she was alone walking home from a bar, well, why was she walking out alone by a bar by herself? She shouldn't have been there. Is she not allowed to walk on the street? Now, I'm not saying that also that, if you're not going, there's certain areas it's just you shouldn't go intelligently because, there is that risk, but at the same time, it's not their fault for what happened to them. You know what I'm saying?
So will the woman get punished or the man?
In some places, yes, the woman is punished as well. Yeah. It's not right. And the thing of it is, if you ask the average Indian, they're going to say, no, that's totally crazy. Why would that be acceptable? This is only in certain areas that are kind of really backwards. But that's kind of what we're talking about here. Yeah.
So is it kind of like whenever a guy does something like he cheated on his husband or whatever, and they feel like he's okay, but
Yeah.
the girl gets judged for it?
Yeah. And you know why that is? Because basically it comes down to children. Is if a woman gets pregnant, you know it's her child, yes? For most of history, you don't know who the guy is in this relationship. So sexual fidelity was basically what the purpose of the whole marriage was, is that you were giving that guarantee to the husband that this is your children because they're going to inherit any property you have and everything else. Like, it all comes down to inheritance, essentially. For man, it wasn't seen as important because they are not the ones being pregnant. So all these laws stem from that as much as anything else. It's just fascinating when you start breaking into culture how inheritance plays this major role in a lot of things. That's actually, guys, why priests aren't allowed to marry originally in the Catholic Church. Is because they didn't want a priest to have a child and that priest dying and the child inheriting the priesthood. Because the priesthood didn't just come with being a priest, it came with property. They owned their church and any property around it. So it was more of a feudal kingdom than anything else. In fact, that's actually why some cultures were matrilineal. That the guy was less important than the woman mattered because you could tell that her children were her children. So any inheritance came from the mother's side. Last names were taken from the mother's side because it made more sense. You knew for sure. So, but this also led to some changes in division of labor as well. Women, for instance, when we talked about staying home, that also meant they controlled the house absolutely. It was their sphere of influence. A husband could not tell a wife how the household was to be run, and she could absolutely order him around when it came to the household. So that also didn't necessarily mean that there was abuse. There absolutely was. And to be fair, it's not just Russia. It's not just India either. There's any cultures that are kind of this older, almost feudalistic society, an old agricultural style society. It's just kind of how things are. Sexual progress is tied intimately with economical progress. I mean, think about today. Why is it that we're seeing more and more men stay home as stay-at-home parents? Why is that becoming more of a thing? Stay-at-home dads. Any ideas? Because the average income that women make is rising. Think about it. If you're having a child and you know that one parent is going to stay home, what's the most logical way of deciding who stays home? Yeah, who makes the least money, right? Well, women are starting to make more money than their spouses in some cases, so it just makes sense for the guy to stay home, right? We have a fundamental change in the way we view gender, because think about how this is going to affect things in, say, 200 years. If more and more guys are staying home, and let's say that it's about a 50-50 split, 200 years from now, it's about half women staying home and half men staying home with the kids, right? Then will women be seen as the natural mothers and caregivers? Probably not. We probably won't associate that with any gender because they're both equally staying at home with the kids, right? So our understanding of what it means to be a man or a woman will change dramatically because of economics. It's not a coincidence that the reason that women have less power in this society is because they don't have the money. We start giving women the money, start giving them control of their own agency on their own lives, they start having more of an influence in saying what they do with their lives. Isn't that fascinating? Your identity, it's all about all these different types of things. Which is why when people criticize women aren't getting into STEM careers, they're not getting into engineering, they're not getting into things of math and sciences, what that's all about. Because think about it, which jobs pay more? So if women are encouraged to go into jobs that pay less, they are not going to have as much agency as opposed to their counterparts who have more money. See what I'm saying? So it's all tied together. Anyways, back to Peter. He starts changing this. By having women come out into the public life with their husbands, they're becoming more than just second-class citizens. That's going to be a process. Lastly, we already talked about that, never mind. So we'll move on to the next section. I'm going to close the door. You guys can start writing this stuff down. This whole section has to do with the concept of the warm water course. Understand this. Russia is behind Europe in more than one way. Behind technology, behind culturally, but also behind economically. Where has Europe's big economic increases been coming from for the past 200 years? Trade with what? Trade where? Where's this new place that's been discovered? Right, the Americans, right? So they're engaging in this really great trade and becoming very rich. Spain, France, England, Portugal, all of them have been on the rise because of trade. So Russia wants in on that. But here's the problem. What's the temperature like in Russia? Right? How cold? Let's talk about it for a second. Do you guys know what the temperature is right about now? I think it's higher than that right now. I think it was around 60s whenever it was this morning. Are you checking? All right, do that real quick if you don't mind. Yeah, sure. 61. 61, all right. So, 61. So it wasn't 50s, you're right. My bad. I thought it was higher. All right, so 60 degrees, right? Okay. What's the coldest temperature you guys have ever experienced in Louisville? Big guess. 0? Do you guys remember the ice storm we had a number of years ago? Right, that got around to like -10. Right? Let's talk about this for a second. -10. In Siberia, in the coldest part of Russia, -80. So think about this. The difference between 60 degrees and -10 is 70 degrees, right? Okay, so -80, the coldest you've ever been, that same difference. 70 degrees colder than what you've experienced. Think about what this does to wood, right? Yeah, this is still the temperatures. You have to be prepared, right? You're going to wear big, heavy fur coats. You have to be fully covered. You know, it's blisteringly cold, but you can do it if you're prepared, right? But going back to the question, think about what this does to wood, right? Especially when it gets wet, like on a ship. No, just the winter. Okay, hot. I think it's like 50. It is, you're right. I mean, think about that, 130 degrees difference, yeah? No, it's not 130 degrees. That's a lot. It's true. But again, back to the original question. What does that do to wood? What happens to water when it freezes? Yes, and what does ice do? Think about what it does to structures. It freezes, and what does ice do? Water, it expands. Yeah? What does that do to things? Think about the roads. What does it do to the roads? It breaks them. Right? You guys know where potholes come from, right? In the road. Water seeps into the road and freezes. It expands, forcing it apart and breaking it apart. This over time causes it to shatter into rubble. Yeah? Water is the most destructive force on this planet. If it gets into wood and freezes, it cracks it. So you have to try to keep the water out. But that's a constant battle. The other problem is, how easy do you think it would be to sail a ship on ice? You guys ever see Frozen? Right? So think about this. If you're trying to set up a trade empire built on shipping, reliant on shipping, how are you going to do that if most of your ports freeze during winter? They need a warm water port that doesn't freeze in the winter. So they need to go south. So Peter really wants a port on the Black Sea. Get ready to hear this a lot, because Russia is going to try to fight and get this port and get the Black Sea for a long time. Like as in, still they're trying it now with the invasion of Sevastopol, with the Crimea. When the Russia invaded Crimea, it was last year. So it's still a thing. But anyways, back to Peter. The problem is the Black Sea is controlled by the Ottoman Empire. So he invades and fails spectacularly. His army gets spanked by the Ottoman Empire. So then he turns to Sweden. Early in the war, one battle, they had a humiliating defeat, where Russia was defeated by an army a fifth of their size. That's like 20 dudes beating up 100. It's humiliating. So eventually, he is able to defeat Sweden and is granted some land along the Baltic Sea, which is this really nasty swamp. But he finally has a warm water port. There he builds his new capital named St. Petersburg. St. Peter. We're not talking about the St. Peter. We're not talking about St. Peter, founder of the faith. I'm talking about he names it after himself, and he calls himself a saint. He is not a humble guy. And then he moves the capital. This is a tremendous undertaking. Don't mistake it. This would be like a society, Washington, we kind of don't like Washington anymore. Our new capital is totally going to be Topeka, Kansas. It's in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing there. Why in God's name are we doing this? Because he said so. All right, fair enough. So they're moving there. They move the entire capital, everybody in it. And of course, how do you think the people of the previous capital feel about this? What? The people of Moscow are just like, what? I think about people who live in Washington, D.C. Why do they live there? Because that's where the government is. What if the government just moved? Right? It'd just be a desert, right? It's not quite that bad in Moscow. Moscow is still a big city, but goodness sake, does this upset people? Now, in addition, under Peter's reign, he sends out explorers to head east. Guys like Titus Bering, which may be Vitus Bering. I sometimes get that confused, but I think it's Titus Bering. Explore the Bering Sea, and explorers go into various territories, including Alaska. So under his reign, Russia just grows exponentially. It becomes the largest country on Earth, which it still is to this very day. So under his reign, Russia is going to emerge as a world power. It's not enough to fully conquer any of the others. In fact, their army is still kind of laughably weak. But they have a giant army. If they don't have the technology, they make up for it in the numbers department. So this really unnerves the rest of Europe. Remember that whole thing we talked about with the balance of power that comes out of the 30 Years' War? This is what we're talking about. Everyone starts kind of changing alliances because they really don't want Russia to become that strong. Newsflash, Russia is going to be very strong. But first we got to get through another monarch. Now, this is the Summer Palace of St. Petersburg. Does it look at all familiar to you? It looks a bit like another palace I showed you, didn't it? The Palace of Versailles, yeah. By the way, this is kind of a neat little thing here. You guys see this stuff right here, this green stuff? You know what that is? Not the trees, the grass. Yeah. What is it? Do you guys know what the shape is? Can you figure out what it is? Shape. It's a maze. You guys ever see Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire? You know the maze they go through, all the big bushes? That's what that is. We have these, they cut the bushes down because they're a pain to maintain. But if you had the bushes there, you wouldn't be able to see through it, right? So you follow the path and you follow the maze. This became a popular thing. Versailles kind of made this a thing. But what you do is you have this big maze that people would take walks through. This is a way where noble couples could, go and spend quality time together. I'm not insinuating anything I'm not insinuating that much to it. They're not going crazy here. But it was a way that you could get away a little bit and actually spend time with someone and chat and date, right? And it was a little adventure. You go through this thing, you look around, and they always had something in the center, right? You see the statue. Well, they would frequent, not all, but they would frequently have something in the center. It could be a fountain, it could be a statue, whatever. That other people could see, be like, oh, that's what's in the center. They go out and that's something, hey, what's in the center? You got to go do it yourself. So you're like in the know, right? So it was a little diversion, right? Anyhow, it's kind of neat. So how does Peter die? Well, he dies, first of all, without an heir. So basically, after his reign, a lot of the changes he makes to the system fall apart. For instance, the system of state service, where the boyars had to work in the government, falls apart after him. And some other things weaken as well. And the way he died, I think, is pretty noteworthy as well, because, again, we've talked about some of his negatives. Let's talk about some of his positives. He generally cared about the Russian people. The reason he was so strict on them was because he wanted them to be on par with Europe. They were so far behind, he knew he would have to drag them, kicking and screaming, into the modern world. I think this is best exemplified in the way he died. You see, he was on a sailboat touring the docks of St. Petersburg when a sailor fell overboard. Now, the water around St. Petersburg, despite being a warm water port, is still blisteringly cold. We're talking about if you're in the water for too long, you just freeze to death. I think it's like 3 minutes or something like that to freeze to death. So what does he do? He strips off his coat, dives in after the guy, and saves his life. Now, I just want you to think about this for a second. We have a king, an absolute monarch, a czar, who is second to no one in power. He's the most important person in his country, and without a second thought, he throws off his own personal coat, dives off of his boat, and goes and saves him himself. He doesn't send someone else to do it for him, he does it himself. Right? And because he jumped in the water, he contracted pneumonia and died from it. He risked his life for somebody who we don't even know. Someone whose name has been lost in history. How many leaders do you know would do that? I mean, seriously, even today. So, yes, he did some bad things, but also he was doing it for probably positive reasons. So, again, mixed legacy. And they didn't call him Peter the Great for nothing. So let's talk about another great person, Catherine. Catherine II was the wife of the Tsar Peter III. And when she comes to court, she's a pretty young lady. She's from Germany. She's actually tied to the Habsburg family. She is not what you would think of as being a strong Russian ruler, but the people love her. She is very charismatic. She's interested in changing the world for better. But the thing is, her husband isn't exactly the best leader. In fact, he's such a bad leader, you could argue, he's assassinated. And the assassins who killed Peter don't have a problem with Catherine. In fact, they support Catherine's bid to power. The assassins are members of Peter's own military. Now let's think about this logically for a second. Who could possibly have ordered the death of the Tsar? It's a bunch of military members, high position. They just decide to kill the Tsar and throw their support behind his wife. Who could possibly have arranged that? Hint, it was Catherine. She killed her own husband. And she wasn't going to share power with anyone. She never remarried. That is not to say she didn't have relationships. She is infamous for having relationships with a lot of people. How many? We don't even know how many. She was infamous for having relationships with guys way younger than herself. She's having relationships with guys who are like in their 20s and she's in her 60s. In exchange, these young men would gain positions of power within the government. So she's a cougar. That's what she is. Allegedly, her best friend would test drive any would-be gentlemen and rate them, on a scale 1 to 10. How was he? And that would determine her own advances. So basically, she was acting like a guy. And the thing is, she was also a pretty great ruler too. One of the first things she does. By the way, that's Catherine for you. One of the first things we're going to talk about that she does, I should say, is improve education. One of the biggest things that they were lacking was an education. In order for you to have an industrialized economy, you have to have a strong education system. Next, codifying law. Law is complicated. I don't know if you guys have ever studied any law, but it gets really specific really fast. Why this is because people need to know exactly how things apply to them. Think of it this way. The basic law of the United States is what? All law in the U.S. stems from what other law? What is our main law? Looking for a specific set of laws. There's a name. The U.S. Constitution. Right. Everything has to be based upon the Constitution. The thing is, though, the Constitution isn't really specific about, what you can and cannot do. It lays out the government really well, but it says, you have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, what rights does that really give you? Do you have the right to kill your neighbors if they make you mad? No, you don't. Well, you can, but you'll be punished for it. By that argument, you can do anything you want as long as you're not caught. Except for, gravity. You have to obey that law. Gravity still affects you in space. True, but you're actually falling. Yeah, seriously, think about it. Whenever you have something orbiting something, it's actually just falling. It's that it gets to the end of its gravitational pull and comes back, and it's always falling. You just have enough forward momentum to keep you going. Or in other words, if you think about taking a ball on the end of a string and you swing, centrifugal force is enough to keep it so that it's staying on the end of the string, but gravity is still influencing it. Advanced physics. Anyways, back to I know I'm going to have some hate mail on YouTube. That's not how physics works. Sorry. I say that I've never actually had hate mail on YouTube. It's going to happen one of these days.
How many subscribers do you have?
I have no idea. I don't care.
You actually comment on it?
I don't know. I don't pay attention to it. I'm sure probably not. I think I just think it'd be slightly upsetting and funny at the same time. Someone's like, "You're wrong." Sorry, YouTube guy. Anyway, someone will start arguing about politics. That's what always happens when YouTube comes. Anyway, she also reorganized the provincial government, basically making the government work together. Oh, I remember, I was talking about codifying law. So basically what happens is, the law gets complicated as laws are added, right? So we go and explain what rights you have. We had a Bill of Rights, okay? But then certain laws are interpreted in different ways. A great example of that is you have the right to bear arms, yes? You have the right to own guns. Here's the thing is, what kind of guns can you own? Right? Now, first of all, you guys can't own any because you're not old enough. Not yet. But when you get 18, you can buy a shotgun or a rifle. When you turn 21, you can buy handguns. But the type of guns you can own are also still limited. For instance, chamber size is limited depending on what state you're in. California, you can't have a chamber or a magazine larger than 10 bullets. And like Kentucky, you can have 15. Because you have situations where people debate, well, what kind of weapon do you really need? You know? Because we would argue that you shouldn't be able to own any weapon you want, right? I mean, otherwise we're saying that, you know, your crazy neighbor down the road should be able to own a nuclear bomb. We're not okay with that, you know? Now, you might argue, say, like, does it really matter if you can have 20 bullets or 15 in the magazine for a squirrel gun? Probably not, but then people start arguing, well, what's an assault rifle? What is... Basically, things get really complicated, right? As people argue these points, the courts kick around things like that. Recodifying is what happens when someone looks along and says, okay, this is so screwed up, we just need to cut it all out and start over. That's what she does. We're going to explain what makes sense, and it's going to be easier to follow, and people are like, oh, that's what I can and can't do. That's all there is to it. It's really important because it makes it easier to do the right thing in terms of following the law, but also when it comes to paying taxes, because that's what they're after most of the time. Now, Catherine does plan a worldwide report from the Ottomans, and also adds more territory by basically eating a third of Poland. Poland ceases to exist under Catherine as she, Austria, and Prussia work together and take over Poland. Poland is not going to exist as a country basically for another 200 years. Now, they're still going to exist as individuals, but Poland has some problems with being surrounded by very powerful enemies. It's not that Poland was weak per se, it's just when you're fighting against the three greatest militaries arguably on European soil, you're probably going to lose. You know? This would be like if the United States, Great Britain, and Canada decided they were just going to take over Australia. Yeah. Why would we want to? You know, Australia's a friend, and, you know, culturally there's ties to all of us. But, you know, if we really wanted to, yes, we could. Right? But that's the thing is, why would we want to invade anybody, really, to take land? We have enough land in the United States. That's not a problem. We have resources that we want, but we can guarantee that through other means, economics, and indeed through putting people on the thrones of countries that are more sympathetic to our desires. The idea of going in and invading a country and taking it over is really kind of limited. Now, that does happen, obviously, because it just happened in Crimea, you know, but you know, it tends to be much more limited than, you know, back then. Anyways, any questions about this? Okay. Well, good stuff overall. Don't forget, I need to have your money and permission slip by tomorrow. Tomorrow is the last day you can turn it in, so don't forget. Okay? That means I still need it from Childs, Cortez, Martin, Prince, Spicer, and White. And again, if, yeah. And your last name? I might have just forgotten to write your name down because someone else did it for you. I'll go back and check through my list of things here and then double check. That's probably right.